I'm Gemma Brooks, a Customer Relationship Manager at SafeMove. SafeMove are a part of Yorkshire Water, and we help the conveyancing sector with their search requirements for property transactions. Our core search being the Con29DW Residential Drainage and Water Search and the Con29DW Commercial Drainage and Water Search for the Yorkshire and Humber region. These searches confirm, amongst other things, whether a property drains to a public sewer and whether a property is connected to a public water main. We also assist mapping customers who are wanting to know the location of public assets. So whilst SafeMove and Yorkshire Water are experts in the public drainage world, today James will be sharing his expertise in private drainage. So just got a few housekeeping points before I pass over to James. The session will be recorded and we will send the link out via email after the session. Please do not use the link automatically created by Teams, as this may not work for you. You will be sent a separate YouTube link by us, so please do look out for that coming via email. James is keen to have an interactive session, so please use the Q&A section at the top of the Teams page to ask any questions, and we will ask these on your behalf. And finally, a satisfaction survey will be sent to you after the session, so please do complete this as your feedback is extremely valuable to us. That's it from me. So James, over to you, our private drainage expert. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Gemma. I've never had an intro like that, so the pressure is now definitely on me, but thank you so much and good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's had their coffee and breakfast because you don't want to be eating during this. Not that it's too graphic, but we'll crack on and hopefully it's not too bad for you. First and foremost, thank you to Gemma for setting this up and Jamie. This isn't a sales pitch, but this slide is purely to hopefully give you some confidence that I know what I'm talking about, to make you feel more comfortable that what you're about to see and listen to is actually correct and you can absorb it if you wish to, and hopefully it'd be a little bit helpful. So UKDP, UK Drainage Professionals, we're a UK wide company specializing in off mains or private or off-grid drainage systems. What we do, we assess the systems, we repair them, replace them, price them, design them, every conceivable thing you might or might not think you need to do with a septic tank, we do. And what's different about us is that although we do have an installation arm, we also have a huge network of contractor partners. So all in all, we are connected to about 110 companies that cover everything and everywhere in the UK. So effectively, UKDP is a one-stop shop for any problem anywhere. This slide is not to promote us. On the penultimate slide of this presentation, Gemma has already said she'd like to do this, but we offer anyone to come out with our engineers and observe or even participate in one of our survey visits. This may be your worst nightmare and you wish I'd quickly gloss over this, but we've had so much excellent feedback over the last few years that we're just continuing to offer this. So at the very end, there's some contact details. If you do want to come out on site, or it could be a booby prize to make one of your colleagues go out with our engineers on site, then wait till the end of the presentation, email in on the information I provide, and then say what geography you're happy to cover. And the next time there's a survey, we'll get you out. You lucky people. So today is not going to be death by PowerPoint. It's my pet hate. There are quite a few slides, but it's more me chatting through them. And as Gemma said a moment ago, if you do have any questions, please just fire them out and I'll try and see them and answer them as best as I can and make this session as useful as humanly possible for you. So what we are going to talk about today is all the different types of off-mains drainage systems. A lot of people seem to say they have a septic tank as a kind of catch-all label, where in fact it could be a cesspit, a sewage treatment plant, or indeed a septic tank. We're also going to spend a little bit of time talking about those and soakaways. And because of previous feedback on this session, I've introduced some of the approximate prices as well against each of these, just in case it's of interest to yourselves. So what we start with, what we're looking at now on the screen, is a cesspit. It is nothing more than a great big underground tank that fills up with the waste and wastewater from the property or properties. It can serve more than one. It will take all the dirty and grey water. So we are talking sink waste, showers, washing machine, dishwasher. And if you look on the right hand side where the inlet pipe is coming into the cesspit, that will take the drainage from the property. It will fill up this tank and nothing will happen inside that tank apart from it fills up and need emptying. There is nothing scientific about a cesspit whatsoever. You'll notice on the left hand side of the tank there is no exit pipe whatsoever. This is a sealed tank underground that simply fills up and needs emptying. Now, if the cesspit is sized appropriately for the property it serves, it should need emptying between 6 and 8 times a year. Now, if this is an old-fashioned, say 40 years plus old system, it will be built of brick or block work, and the customer will only know it needs emptying when something quite dramatic happens, such as the property's facilities start to work a little bit slower than usual, or there might be some nasty odours coming out, or indeed it might be overspilling in the garden. There was no science behind when these things needed to be emptied back in the day. So sometimes septic tank owners will nearly every single day just lift the covers in the back garden and see where the level's at. It's pretty gross, but it's the only way to make sure it doesn't overspill. The modern day cesspits have telemetry. So you'll get a message or an email saying that it should be emptied in the next few days, and that should be enough time to get in touch with the local emptying company. And when I say emptying, we're talking, think of a huge lorry the size of a bin lorry with a 3-inch diameter hose on the back end. It gets inserted into the cesspit via a manhole cover, and then a massive vacuum is turned on the back of the wagon, and it literally sucks all the contents away. When that cesspit is empty, the process just repeats and repeats. It fills up and is emptying. So these things are the least environmentally friendly. It's a perfectly legal provision of drainage, but because there's no treatment, if there is ever a structural breach, you're looking at unseparated waste going straight to ground, meaning it can go straight to an aquifer, which means it goes straight to a surface water. So it's the least environmentally friendly because there is no treatment whatsoever with a cesspit. They're also really big. For a 3 or 4 bedroom house, the minimum size is 18,000 litres. So if we equate that to dimensions, you're looking at a tank that's 2.5 deep, 2.5 wide, and 5 metres long. So they're expensive to buy, they're expensive to put in the ground, and they're quite expensive to keep going every year, because if you look at the bottom of the screen there, you're looking at maybe £300 an empty, and there's between 6 and 8 empties a year. So perfectly legal, but to put it in perspective, I think in the last decade I've installed just 2 all over the UK, because there's normally a better option for the properties. So I'm going to jump from the worst environmental off-mains drainage system to the best. So what we're looking at here is a sewage treatment plant. Once again, we're going right to left. So again, the dirty and grey water comes into the sewage treatment plant, and you'll notice there's effectively 3 zones or 3 compartments in this sewage treatment plant. There are about 30 UK manufacturers of sewage treatment plants. They're all different shapes and sizes, slightly different working processes, but the vast majority, well over 95%, will be very similar to what we're looking at now. So if we go right to left, we're looking at the first compartment, and the correct label is called a primary zone. Nothing really scientific happens in a primary zone apart from natural separation. Now, I'm going to try and be as non-disgusting as I possibly can be, but bear with me because this is all I've got to work with. In quiet, calm conditions, normally at night time when none of us are really using the facilities at a property, natural separation occurs. And what I mean by that is the dense waste will naturally fall to the bottom, and it's referred to specialist surveying equipment. I don't know why it's called that, but it's pretty gross, but that is what it's called. It's a sludge layer. And on the flip side of that, the fat, oil and grease and any matter that floats will go to the top, and that will form a scum layer. And what we have in the middle is effectively just the separated dirty water, but that has also got a label, and no one will ever drink again after this because it's called clarified liquor. I know, I don't know why, but that's what it's called. Now, that clarified liquor is the only part of that primary zone that's allowed to go into the next chamber, and that's the treatment zone. And that is where the magic really occurs. You'll see on top of the sewage treatment plant, you've got that black fan, and that's just indicating that that's a blower housing. And that pumps oxygen into that treatment zone 24 hours a day, absolutely constantly. And that's because for the bugs to grow, which is part of the treatment process, the bugs, biomass, need food, water, and oxygen. Food and water is already present from what we produce that goes into the first compartment, but oxygen is needed to be introduced to create the biomass. And it's super clever. It reproduces all the time, and every time it reproduces, it gets cleaner. It gets rid of all the toxins, all the acids, all the nasties, and what it leaves is a treated effluent, which is a minimum of 95% pure. So if you run a tap, it's odorless, there's no color. That's what the treated effluent should be looking like when it leaves a sewage treatment plant. Now, because it's not pure, it can't be used for anything. You can't even water the plants in the garden with it. But what it does give the property owner is a myriad of choices for where that treated effluent can go. Legally, it can go to a variety of soak away systems underground. It can go to a free-flowing watercourse, a ditch, a stream, a river. It can go to a seasonal stream, river, ditch as well, but a partial soakaway needs to be inserted first, and I'll go into that a little bit later. But effectively, you've got the cleanest effluent going to a variety of different discharge options. It's the best for the environment. And it's not massively expensive to install. If you're looking at a 3 or 4 bed property, you can buy a sewage treatment plant for less than £2,000. And then I've got a range of between 8 and 12,000. I know that's, you think, well, it's a little loose, but it has to be like that because you have to install the sewage treatment plant to the appropriate depth of the pipe work that's already at the property. So if it's deep pipe work, the excavation's got to be deeper, and that has a massive impact on the installation price. Also, access is a massive issue, whether you need to create your own access or whether there's nice roaming areas of open fields to get the equipment in. So 8 to 12,000 is a pretty good price for a small sewage treatment plant. And they, like a motor vehicle, they need an annual service. They need to service A, to make sure it's working correctly, but B, most importantly for the property owner, it makes sure the manufacturer's warranty remains valid. If there's ever a problem and the customer hasn't had it serviced, irrespective of whether that service is related to the problem or not, the manufacturers won't cover the warranty claim. So it's really important that it's an annual service. And during that service, the attending engineer will do a variety of tests, and they will make the call of whether that treatment plant needs to be emptied or not. Normally it does, but sometimes it can go on for 18 months or 24 months. But it's a decision of the engineer doing the service that will relate that back to the property owner. But still, the absolute majority of off-mains drainage systems in the UK will still be septic tanks. I'm going to spend just a little bit of time on them, if I may, purely because the majority of what we'll see during our transactions or the building surveyors see on site will still be septic tanks. Originally built of brick and block, and from the 60s onwards, it's glass reinforced plaster, like a fiberglass material. But I'm going to talk you through the different types, if I may. Now, this slide was really for the building surveyors, and I spend most of my time presenting to building surveyors, but I thought it's useful to leave this slide in here just in case you guys see the pictures or feedback from the surveyors on their reports. And it's really a fast indicator, a visual indicator that this property, irrespective of where it is in the UK, must be on a private drainage system or an off-mains drainage system, purely because the sequence and number of manholes in a row. Now, without being too boring, and I'm probably already guilty of that, for which I apologise, any manhole should be a dimension of 450 by 600 mil, and the 600 mil being the length should dictate the direction of the pipework within that manhole. So if you're looking at the length of a manhole, when you lift the cover, that should be the direction the pipe is going. In this scenario, we've got MH1, which is manhole number 1, which is nearest the property. We then got a 2-chamber septic tank, and then we have a distribution chamber. Now, when we look at a picture normally of the property, we're not going to have the lovely white labelling, but even so, if you've got a sequence of manholes that close together, all roughly going in the same direction, there is no way that's going to be an on-mains drainage system. A manhole is only necessarily be educated on the different systems, the connection coming in the side, or there's a connection greater than 45 degrees. So unless this is the craziest drainage system known to mankind, this is going to be an off-mains drainage system. And I did notice a question there. I'm sorry, is there a question there, Gemma?
No, I don't think so. No.
Oh, I just saw a hand
Not
up.
yet.
I do apologise.
Oh, no, I don't think so, no, unless I've missed that.
So I'm just making sure everyone's awake. I'll carry
I'll
on.
double check and come back on if there is.
Thanks, Gemma.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is a cutout of a old style brick septic tank. We're now going left to right. So this is a 2-chamber septic tank, but they can be a single chamber. Majority are 2, or some are 3. In a septic tank, it's really important to appreciate that there is no treatment whatsoever. A septic tank is purely there to separate. It's exactly the same as that first chamber in a sewage treatment plant. It separates sludge to the bottom, fat, oil and grease to the top, and it just separates out that dirty water, that clarified liquor in the middle. Now, the more number of chambers a septic tank has, the cleaner that clarified liquor will get as it works its way through, but it's still not treated. The treatment aspect of any septic tank is carried out in the soakaway side. So it's imperative the soakaway is working well, as it is here. It's really important they know the septic tank is no good without the soakaway, and vice versa. Both elements need to be working for the treatment process to occur. Now, a septic tank works by displacement. Once it's up to the working level, the correct operating level, if you put 1,000 litres into a septic tank, 1,000 litres has to get pushed out purely under gravity and displacement. That's how they work. And that's why it's absolutely critical that when we look at these dip pipes, these little sideways T pipes, as they're sometimes referred to, it's so important they are on. On the inlet pipe, it's angled downwards to make sure that it doesn't disturb the crust. I laugh because this is all I do all day, every day. But whenever I say crust, I still make myself chuckle. It's the child in me coming out. If that T-piece on the inlet pipe isn't in place, all the water, all the waste that comes in will hit that crust and disturb it. And we do not want that. We want it to come in below the layer of the crust so the separation process can occur naturally and thoroughly. Also, on the outlet side, the T-piece is there to is purely protection. If the T-piece is not there on the outlet side, anything that hits the layer of that pipework, the height of that pipework, will be allowed to get out. And what's that layer? It's the fat, oil and grease. And the reason it needs to be retained within a septic tank is because any soakaway arrangement is not designed to receive it. If fat, oil and grease is allowed to escape out of a septic tank and hit the soakaway, it will very quickly block all the small holes in and around a soakaway where the dirty water is able to escape. It will block up all the escape routes. The soakaway will become saturated and exhausted. It will not be able to perform, and then 2 or 3 different things happen. One, the water will just come back to the septic tank. It will rise unnaturally high, which is called a surcharge event, and then it could either pop the manhole covers and start to leak on the over the top of the septic tank, or it can go all the way back to the property and start to negatively affect the property, such as customer flushes the toilet, the water goes really high inside the pan before it slowly comes back down again. Or there could be horrendous smells behind the washing machine or in the shower tray. Or another way, another indicator that soakaway has failed is if when it's a rainy day and we're on the road and we see the rainbow effect in a puddle on the road, that's what you see in the back garden of the property when a soakaway fails. The oil has come through the ground surface, that's where it's breached, and that is an indication that soakaway has failed. So these are the versions of a septic tank from 1965 onwards. I'm not affiliated to any manufacturer in the UK, but it's just a fact. Clargester, which some of you may have heard of, they introduced this is called an onion septic tank. Its actual name is an alpha tank, but because it looks like an onion, that's the one that stuck. They brought these to the UK in 1965, and pretty much every manufacturer followed suit pretty quickly. Not necessarily with the shape, but with the material. And if you notice on this one, on the previous septic tank, it was horizontal displacement. This septic tank is vertical displacement. So if we look at the left one first, if we may, the inlet pipe is really extended. That will be about 1 metre long. The waste comes into the septic tank, and that inlet pipe needs to be that long to make sure that it goes underneath that baffle cone, which looks like a lampshade. Now, it's really important to understand that the Clargester designers didn't think through the entrance turret to this alpha septic tank is the only place you can get the tanker hose in, but they connected the baffle cone by galvanized steel hooks which were attached to the side of the neck. So it only took for the emptying hose to knock one of the hooks, that baffle cone would come out of position, and that baffle is supposed to stop the fat oil and grease getting to a certain height in that tank. The minute that baffle was out of alignment, the fat oil and grease was go around the outside of the baffle cone, reach the outlet pipe height, hit the soakaway and cause failure. So within just a few years, the right hand side generation 2 alpha was developed, where the baffle cone was introduced during the manufacturing process. So if you imagine that spherical aspect of that tank was put together in 2 halves, as it's welded together, that's when the baffle cone was inserted. So it's not quite bulletproof, but it was a much more robust tank, and that design is still being used today. So that got introduced late 60s, early 70s, and you can still find those today, and they work perfectly well. If I may draw your attention, if you look at the top of that baffle cone, there's that darker ball. That is a baffle ball, and it's nothing more than polystyrene with a resin outside coating. What would happen is, as the liquid level rises in that tank, the ball goes with the liquid level. When it hits the underside of the baffle cone, it follows the contours, and when the level of the liquid reaches a certain height, that ball forms a plug. That forces all the dirty water to go through these tiny slots in the baffle cone, rise above the baffle layer, hit the height of the outlet pipe, and then only the appropriate dirty water is allowed to go to the soakaway. It works brilliantly well most of the time, but I'm going to show you in a second what happens when it fails. These are really cheap to buy. You can buy a septic tank for under £1,000 off the shelf at any builder's merchant, and you can get them in the ground for 5 to 8,000. Once again, there's only a range of prices because of the the depth you need to excavate and how good or bad the access is. The separation that occurs within a septic tank is called anaerobic digestion, and again, purely separation in the septic tank, and the soakaway provides the treatment. The problem we have, and this is why it's really important that we speak to surveyors about this, because even though they're only there to have a quick look when they're doing a general building survey, they might actually be able to pick up that there is a problem in their visit. I appreciate they'll be looking at a myriad of different things during their visit, but if they notice an off-mains drainage system, they might also notice there's an issue there and then. They don't last forever. Normal manufacturers normally give them a 20-year lifetime guarantee. In reality, they're probably going to last 40 or 50, but they're not going to last forever. So at some point they'll need repairing or replacing, and there's a myriad of reasons why they may fail. It could be the structural, it could be a structural deficiency. If they're in a driveway, they could have been driven over and that's caused a problem. They could have deteriorated over time, could have been put in the ground incorrectly, all these reasons. And here are two examples, two different styles of septic tanks, but the customers came back to us with the same issues, as in toilets weren't flushing properly, there's some nasty odours. So we went out on both occasions. We had the septic tanks emptied so we could have a look with our camera equipment, see exactly what was going on. On the left-hand example, that is a single zone concrete cylindrical septic tank. We had it emptied, and those two little clay pieces of pipe at the bottom, there are T-pieces protecting the inflow and the outlet to the soakaway. They were both on the base of the tank. So whether they fell off or whether they were knocked off, it's largely irrelevant. That's why the soakaway fell, because there was no protection and that tank had to be replaced. Because the soakaway failed, there wasn't enough room to put replacement soakaway in, so we had to put a sewage treatment plant in and discharge it to a local watercourse. On the right-hand side, and the reason I referenced that baffle bore a few moments ago, if you look at that lampshade, which is the baffle cone, which looks like a witch's hat, in the background you see that baffle ball and the light of our camera bouncing off it. That ball should obviously be underneath the baffle cone, forming a plug when the liquid level rises. So when we had this tank empty, we saw straight away that there's been perhaps some sort of impact. If you look at that top curvature, that's where the baffle was welded to the two halves of the sphere of the tank. It's come out of alignment. There's no protection for the soakaway for the fat, oil and grease that was able to get around the side of that baffle cone, and that's why the soakaway failed. That was able to be replaced with a new septic tank and a soakaway system. This one, I imagine if anyone goes to a property, even if you're not an expert, you could probably take a guess that something isn't quite right. This is a very, very common occurrence. Mostly it's residential, light industrial. After any period of sustained and heavy rainfall, most of the modern plants, whether it's a septic tank or a sewage treatment plant, they're made of fiberglass or glass reinforced plastic, which is effectively what boats are made of, specifically the hull. What are they good at? They're really good at floating. So in a scenario where it's been raining heavily, the ground will get saturated. It builds up hydrostatic pressure, water pressure. And in a scenario that we're looking at now, when the contents are removed with the annual desludge or annual empty, we quickly realized that it was only the weight of the contents inside that tank that was keeping it in the ground. So once the contents have been removed and the tank itself only weighs about 400 kilos, you've got this empty vessel with this hydrostatic pressure pushing in from the sides and below. And what does it want to do? It either collapses or it pops. This one pops. Sometimes they only pop a couple of inches, which is enough for the pipework to come out of alignment, and that can still be a problem. Or other times it's a bit more extreme, like this example, where it's come 2 meters out of the ground. What will be happening in this scenario is the property is still using their facilities, but it's just going straight into the void underneath that tank. Normally rips the fiberglass side, which it has done on the left, that little black hole there, it's ripped. That we couldn't do a patch repair, so that needed, the whole system needed to be replaced. Last winter we were seeing one of these a day, and considering we're one of maybe 70-80 companies of our ilk in the UK, we're seeing one a day. Everyone else is probably seeing one a day as well, so it's an extremely common occurrence. This slide I've left in because you don't have to empty a complete off-mains drainage system to ascertain there's a problem. For example, if a property owner has said that they've been at property 15 years, it used to need to be emptied once a year, but just recently it's gone to every 6 months, and even more recently it's gone to every 3 months, then that is a massive red flag straight away that something is not working as it should be. If, as I say on the second point there, if the toilets are taking longer to flush or there's nasty odours, it might be a red flag that the system, there's a more fundamental problem. It could be something silly like the customer's child has put a a toy car down the toilet, and it could be something much more isolated and something that's easy to fix, but it could be something more holistically bad for the system. Again, boggy patches. Also, if there's a beautiful garden, but there's an area of stinging nettles that seem a little unsightly, it doesn't really fit in with the rest of the garden. Nettles love the how can I put it, what we produce. So for example, if there's a high count of ammonia, stinging nettles love ammonia. So if a soakaway can no longer work and it's just pooling water underground or near the surface of the ground, stinging nettles will grow in that area. If you see stinging nettles, it doesn't mean there's a failed soakaway, but it just could be another indicator of a problem. But normally, and this isn't sales pitch, normally the system needs to be emptied, specialist surveying equipment is inserted, and we can get a complete picture of the whole system, see what exactly is going on. I leave this slide in just in case you are as excited or sad as Gemma. Choose which one you want. If any of your colleagues want to come out with our guys, you'll see this is Simon. He's based up in Yorkshire. He's got a GoPro camera on a high beam torch there. He's there to see the tank being emptied to make sure what level it's at. He's seeing how the tank performs as the level's getting drained down in case there's any structural breaches, and you can see and hear water escaping or coming into the tank. And then when it's empty, we'll go in with the camera and we do 3 videos, do a horizontal, one tilted down and one tilted up. Between the 3 videos, we've got a complete picture of that asset. We'll be able to highlight any structural issues. We'll be able to take the measurements to make sure that it is appropriately sized for the property. And also it provides technically an audit trail to back up whatever we say as to what that asset is, how big it is, its condition, and is it legal.
Hi, James. I'll just interrupt. So we've got a
Please do.
question. So we've got from Anonymous. Hi, James. How would you get the ball type septic tank emptied? Who would you get the sludge stroke heavy removed from the onion one? Thank you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Did that right? Did I read
Absolutely.
it properly?
No, it's fine. So, and this is why it's so important that the engineers on behalf of the emptying companies know what they're looking at for that reason. Every system will need a slightly different process for the emptying to be safe. In a scenario where it's the ball septic tank, there should be a little bit of liquid level quite high. So they should gently take that first to lower the level. And then with the end of the emptying hose, gently nudge that ball out of the way to get the liquid underneath it. If it's an engineer that's busy or they haven't been taught correctly, they could just put the tanker hosing really heavy. And at the end, it's a metal coupling, a really heavy metal coupling. And if it's just thrust into the tank, it can cause damage. So sometimes that is the reason for damage. So they do need to know, be educated on the different systems, the process in which they should be emptied to make sure it's safe for the system and themselves. For example, if I may, on the floating tank scenario, if there is hydrostatic pressure present in and around the tank, it still doesn't help because you take the emptying engineer a moment or two to realise that there is some creaking noises or some subtle ground movement around his or her feet during the emptying process, and they need to be able to understand what on earth is going on. They should stop immediately and then refill the tank with clean water to get that equilibrium of pressure. But yeah, it's people think, oh, they just come and empty it. It's really important they know what they're doing because they could be the first person to say there's a problem, or they could in fact cause a problem. So it's a really important part of the off mains drainage process.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Okay. This slide is in there because you guys might be doing it if you come out, you lucky people. But part of the process, whether it's us or any other company that's similar to us, they want to check that the tank or treatment plant is at its operating level, which tells us straight away that it should be working. If the level is too high, that's an indicator the soakaway isn't working. If the level is too low and it's not reaching the height of the outlet pipe, that's normally a sign that there's some sort of structural breach to allow that contents to be escaping into the substrata around the tank itself. Do a camera inside the tank to check the structural condition. You then do a CCTV camera survey in the pipework leading away from the tank and back to the property to make sure that the pipework is not allowing groundwater to come in or out, in fact. And also we do rainwater cross connection checks, because no off mains drainage system should have any rainwater connected whatsoever. In a cesspit, it means it will fill artificially quickly, so the costs will get really high and really fast because it'll be emptied more frequently than necessary. In a septic tank, it will push through the contents of the septic tank before the separation process has occurred correctly, which means you're getting noughties being pushed out of the tank, which will start to make the soakaway fail. And in a treatment process, in a sewage treatment plant, if you've got water coming through, again, there won't be sufficient time for the middle zone where the treatment process occurs to work thoroughly, which means it will get pushed through and you'll get too many suspended solids and naughty matter that should be retained being pushed out. And more times than not, that sewage treatment plant be going to a watercourse, which means it will be polluting. In our stats of the last 1,000 off-mains drainage systems that we've surveyed, 35% of properties had rainwater coming into the foul system. And diverting rainwater off a foul system can be as expensive as replacing the septic tank or sewage treatment plant. It can double the cost of an installation to get those diversions away, but it has to be done. 2 moments, sorry about that. This one hopefully will strike a chord with your good selves, the regulations around these off-mains drainage systems. I look at these every day, so I am the saddest man in the planet, or saddest person on the planet. Building Regulations 2010 Part H Section 2 specifically covers off-mains drainage systems. There is a 46-page document called the BS 6297, which covers drainage fields, which are the only allowable soakaway arrangement these days. There is the British Water Flows and Lows document currently on number 4, which talks about how to size these tanks, whether it's residential, light industrial, that had already previously been sold. Potato at the moment, specifically English 2015, the rules. So DEFRA introduced this regulatory reform on the 1st of January 2015. I use the word police, but sort of overarching regulated by the Environment Agency in England. And it was devised and introduced predominantly to attack all the septic tanks that were discharging to watercourses. Now, there is no database in England for where off-mains drainage systems are. The only time that a off-mains drainage system is on the radar of the Environment Agency is if they've needed permission. So if they've formally requested a consent to discharge, it goes through the permitting team at the Environment Agency. They come back and say yes or no. That will be on their radar, because then they might decide to come and do some proactive checks. But the general binding rules were for the septic tanks that were discharging where no one knew where they were. So unfortunately, it was actually immensely difficult to get this message out there. And the fact we're still talking about it now, some nearly 9 years later, says that we've probably only scratched the surface of assessing and then addressing these non-compliant discharges. So effectively, when this was first released, there was a 5-year, 60-month time frame where it was believed in 2015 that should be sufficient time to find all these non-compliant discharges and put them right. But in reality, because there was a lack of database, so it was near impossible to create any meaningful outbound proactive messages. We're in a situation where the majority of these upgrades were only carried out on a reactive basis. Now, whether that's through a property transaction, whether that's through an annual empty where the emptying engineer happened to be up on the regs and told the customer that they had a non-compliant system. But effectively, we were facing a scenario when we came to 2020 after this 5-year period where I think we all knew that only a tiny percentage of these systems had been dealt with, that we were waiting for the government website to be updated. And what happened was that a line was introduced that said, if a non-compliant system is found, then an allowable and decent time frame for the period to put it right is 12 months after discovery. So, and we're still in that now. So whenever an off-mains drainage system that is non-compliant is found, We make the asset owner aware of that, and they have 12 months. The issue is, although the clock is ticking, there's no one policing that clock. So it's still a little bit spurious. We need a permanent power supply. Collective, we have got so much more tuned into the fact that it should be made a condition of sale in a property transaction. Much more building surveyors are pushing for a thorough survey for their customers whenever a property is seen to have an off-managed drainage system. What we see is that there's sometimes a slight delay. I think the habit is that it's still an 11th hour survey. Everything else is checked and it's the last minute survey, which causes a bit of problem between the vendor and the purchaser. Who should get it emptied, who should get it surveyed, who's paying for what. But whoever decides that, and it's not written into the regulations who should pay for what, but in my mind, I would love it if a pre-purchase survey is made mandatory. It still doesn't help because the general binding rules doesn't stipulate if a non-compliant system is found during a property transaction. It doesn't go as far as saying who should be paying for that. Typically, and I imagine everyone here today will probably see that there's some sort of price reduction, or maybe we've got fantastic sellers and they take it on the chin and progress with the upgrades before the sale goes through. But effectively, if a non-compliant system is discovered, it should become a condition of sale. Whether you guys have seen that firsthand, I don't know, but hopefully through little things like this and me chatting away for an hour, if it's a tiny bit of awareness and you guys are doing it anyway, but now you push even harder, fantastic. If you've already got it covered, then good for you and well done, because I know sometimes it doesn't happen. This is really important from a building surveying perspective because a part of our business is also helping with PI claims. And at the moment I think we're 32 or 33 at the moment, PI claims purely against the building surveyors when they haven't labelled a drainage system as a red 3 on their survey. So they are not pushing their client to get a specialist survey carried out. And what we're also seeing is where people are getting more aware of these, if a property is being sold now, that had already previously been sold post 2015, the non-compliant system wasn't flagged up on the original transaction, but it's being found on this transaction. And then we enter a world of pain on should someone else have seen it on the original transaction, and so on and so forth. So this kind of session is really about awareness and making sure any professional stakeholder involved in a property transaction is aware of what to look out for, or as a minimum, making sure that the right person is concentrating efforts on that off-managed drainage system to make sure it is compliant and legal. Like I say, there is no one.
I've just got another question, please.
Good.
Can you please comment on whether there are specific considerations where you have more than one property using the same facility?
Considerations. Yes. So for any shared scenario, if we use a cesspit or a septic tank as a first example, irrespective of how many properties are using it, I always urge the customers, if there is nothing written into the deeds, to come up with an agreement. Not necessarily going to an external management company to get something super formal drawn up, but something between them to say who is paying for what, who is going to arrange the empty, and it just helps when the properties are sold that the agreement is already in place. With a sewage treatment plant, it needs to be formal because in addition to the emptying, you're looking at the annual service cost, and on 99 point something percent of sewage treatment plants, they all need a permanent power supply. So whether that is a individual metered power supply that all the owners have signed up to for an individual agreement, or whether someone in a communal system is paying and asking for X pounds back for each of the neighbours, that needs to be a formal agreement. And where there isn't one in place, we find all sorts of issues, such as little Mrs. Smith against a family of 6. She's arguing why should she pay half the emptying where they're using it a lot more. It's a decent argument, but it doesn't work like that. If you've got 2 properties, it's 50% each, unless the deed stipulates something different. So absolutely, it's so important an agreement is made for their protection while they're in ownership and for the new owners in the scenario of a property transaction. Absolutely critical.
Excellent. We've got a couple of other questions that have
Oh,
come
good.
through now. Do you
Excellent.
want to take them all at the same time?
Yes, please.
James, would it be a cost at the customer stroke property owner to get this changed? I'm not sure which part. That's an anonymous user, so I'm not quite sure
If that's in
which part we're
relation, if
changing.
that's in relation to changing a non-compliant system into a compliant system, yeah. Outside of the scenario of a property transaction, that 12-month period should kick in for the asset owner, the property owner. Like I say, there is no one policing that 12-month countdown, but yes, the onus is on the owner to upgrade that and to make sure that what they're doing is right. And I know that sounds a bit silly and a bit woolly, but there are too many cowboys in my industry. So it's really down to the owner to do a bit of due diligence to make sure. A lot of companies like myself are affiliated or authorized by the manufacturers, but I'd really go on, Trustpilot and do your normal due diligence to make sure it's a proper and thorough company. But in a transaction, property transaction, what I have seen personally is it's typically a price reduction rather than anything else. On one or two occasions, I've seen a very proactive vendor and they'll get the installation work completed so then they can sell their property knowing they've done the right thing. But I can only remember one or two instances like that. Typically, it's a price reduction and then it's up to the incoming owners to sort that out after they've taken ownership.
Yeah, okay, excellent. And a few more. What is the relevance of the 1983 installation date, please?
I am so sorry. That is on my bullet point for a reason. It's really important because 1983 is when the applicable British standard was introduced regarding off-mains drainage systems. So the reason that's important and why it was on the slide and why I didn't talk about it then, I don't know, but thank you so much for pulling me up. And I did that on purpose to make sure everyone was awake. If a system predates 1983, let's just say it's a 1950s septic tank going to a soakaway, an old-fashioned soakaway, so an excavated pit backfilled with rubble. Not particularly scientific, but it would have worked okay. Now, if we go out to check, we're on for the purchaser. We check the system. The septic tank is structurally safe. The whole system is working, but the soakaway is a soakaway, it's not a drainage field. She said, well, it's not compliant with the general binding rules, but it's functional and it's working and there's no surcharge into the property. If it's a pre-1983 installation, the Environment Agency are happy to leave that as is. So technically, it's not compliant with the general binding rules, but if it's pre-83, before the applicable British standard was introduced, then there is no need for that system to be touched. There's no need until it fails. When it fails, all the modern day regulations kick in and everything has to be adhered with. But if it's pre-83, it's working, it's functional, and it's not causing any pollution issues, then that doesn't need to be touched. And from a surveying perspective, it causes us issues because we can write in our report, black or white, is it non-compliant with the general binding rules? We say no, but then we have to caveat say, but it's a pre-1983, you don't have to do anything. But unfortunately, it's not massively well explained on the government website. So some customers aren't happy with the explanation. They will go off on their own backs and speak to the Environment Agency and double check that information, which I completely understand why, because it's a little bit ambiguous. But absolutely, from all our interactions with the environmental regulators, if it's pre-83 and fully functional, they will not expect anyone to put their hand in the pocket to upgrade it. That is until the system fails. And like I say, then all the modern regs have to be applied.
Makes sense. Yeah. Okay. I've got a few more questions. Do you want to move on with your presentation and we'll
No.
ask
Keep
them
the
at the
questions
end, or shall I
coming.
carry on?
Yeah,
I
please
think you've
do.
actually covered this one off in the last question, but do the general binding rules apply to tanks pre-1983? I think you covered that off in your explanation that you've just gone through. Let me just have a look.
Can I just say on the pre-83, if it's a septic tank that's structurally sound, but it's pre-83, but it's discharged into a watercourse, that would still be non-compliant. The pre-83 is only when the septic tank is discharged into ground and it's functioning. If it's a pre-83 septic tank discharged into a watercourse, that's still non-compliant and that will need to be upgraded.
Okay, great, thank you. How much do the surveys of the systems generally cost?
I can only speak for our surveys. We're the most expensive in the UK because we're the most thorough. We have two options. A basic survey or standard survey is £549, including VAT. The plus survey is £799, including VAT. Both surveys cover the tank, the outfall and rainwater cross connections, but the plus survey includes a full CCTV camera survey of the connecting pipework from the property all the way to the tank. But both will give a clear picture on the compliance or otherwise with the general binding rules.
Excellent, fabulous. What are the regulations if you have a septic tank that doesn't go to a water course? Is this allowed to just go to ground?
If it goes to ground and it's functioning and not causing the pollution and a pre-83, yes, you leave it as is. Um, if it's pre-83 and causing a pollution, no, you can't do that. It also depends on what going to ground means. Sometimes, even with the very best equipment, you can't get a clear picture. As you might imagine, what goes down these pipes isn't particularly clear. So even after you've drained all the contents out with one of these massively powerful vacuum tankers, it can still leave certain detritus inside the pipe. It can still be a very dark pipe and dirty. So when the camera gets pushed through, sometimes the cover, the lens gets dirty, and doesn't matter how many times you clean it, the process is repeated. So with a camera, you can tell where it's going because there's a sonar in the camera head. You can tell how deep it is underground, and you can tell where it is in a garden, for example. But sometimes you lose the picture. So it just comes to an end. So you can say roughly it's 20 meters away in the middle of the garden and it's discharged into ground and it's working, and that's all you can say. So we can't always stipulate what the specific design arrangement is of a discharge to ground. We can just say that it is discharged into ground. Where we can see with a clear picture what the discharge is, we are then able to comment further in a more sort of technical viewpoint on what that is, how it's been built, and its likely time frame for good usage moving forwards. But technically, if a septic tank is discharged into ground and it's working, nothing needs to be done.
Thank you very much. Is there any legislation, regulations that make all properties using a septic tank liable for the replacement cost of the tank, where there are only the usual provisions in the deeds for contributing to the maintenance of the drainage system?
Well, they're the okay. So they are the asset owners. So irrespective of the deed, let's say, for example, we've got a problem customer. It's obvious the system isn't working. There's a dog walker that's gone by. They've seen some pollution. They've gone to the EA, for example, or they've gone to the environmental health at the local authority, which is the normal route, to be fair.
Mhm.
The environmental protection officer, environmental health officer won't care what the deeds say. They will see who's liable or who's the asset owner of that tank. And if they don't proactively sort it out, they'll get served with a Section 59 notice under the 1984 Buildings Act, where they will be given 28 days to get that sorted, or the local authority will come and carry out works in default and recharge the owner with a 16% interest charge. So that, from irrespective of the deeds, that asset owner is completely liable, but it might need a decent amount of formal pushing and shoving from either the local authority or the EA, if it's in England, to make them aware of it and then force them to have the works carried out.
Okay, excellent. Would you like some more questions?
Yes.
Who is responsible for a non-compliant system saying where 5 properties share a tank which is situated on only one of the property's field, especially when someone wants to sell? So who is responsible for a non? I think you've covered that off already.
All the owners, and
Yeah.
that's why it's unbelievably critical that an agreement's in place. It's a really good question actually, because the septic tank can only be in one place, and normally it means one property is having it in their land. They're dealing physically with the emptying, they're facilitating the emptying. They're probably the ones on the phone making sure everything's okay,
Mhm.
and then they're the ones asking for a fifth back or a quarter, whatever the contribution is. But yeah, any party that is communicating with that system is jointly liable unless the deeds state a different apportionment percentage split. So if
Mhm.
there's 5 owners, unless the deeds say differently, they are all on for 20% of that repair cost, the replacement cost, emptying cost, every cost associated
Mhm.
with that system.
Yeah, great, thank you. Is there a good way to check what the flow is that is coming from an existing septic tank stroke STP?
Oh, I don't know if they, as in the quality of it or the volume of it. I'm not sure in which context that question has been asked.
I'm not sure. Can we unmute Jenny? Does Jenny want to come on? I don't know if Jamie can unmute Jenny just to get a bit more information.
Or Jenny can write it and I can talk about this side and we'll come back to that
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
So,
So, yeah,
yeah.
we'll come back. Yeah, at the end, we'll come back
Okay.
to the other questions because we've got quite a few filtering
Oh,
through now.
brilliant, brilliant.
So
Okay, perfect. So
I'll come back to you in a minute. Thank you.
awesome, awesome. So
Thanks.
in England specifically, where the general binding rules are in place, any new septic tank that has been installed in England after January 2015 has to look like this image now. Don't worry about the cat on the doorstep. That's not relevant, but for some reason we always have cats in our pictures. Don't ask me why. What we're looking at there, the white onion tank is the septic tank. The black box in front of it is called a distribution chamber, which is where the pipe work for the drainage fill, which is the blue pipe work, is able to be accessed. You lift the cover of the sample chamber, the distribution chamber, and you can see that everything is flowing nicely. The drainage field is the only compliant legal soakaway arrangement from January the 15th in England. A drainage field is a series of perforated or slotted pipework. They're typically 4-inch diameter, and they're laid in the ground almost flat. So the gradient is 1 in 200. So every 200-meter length, it only needs to drop a meter. And the reason it's designed that flat is specifically so the water going through the pipework is going through immensely slowly. That is because these slots or perforations at the bottom of this pipework allows the water to go through, and the bedding of the pipe and the substrata under that is where the treatment occurs after a septic tank. And effectively, as it goes so slowly, over maybe 30, 40, 50 years, those holes and the substrata underneath it will fail in sequence. So it's just designed to fail slowly or work efficiently, whichever way you wish to call it. So, but for a septic tank, it can only now discharge after 2015 in England to a drainage field soakaway. If a septic tank is discharging to anything other than that, and it's been installed after 2015, there will need to be a permit to discharge from the EA against that system, otherwise it is a non-compliant system. So it's so important that the owners keep their associated paperwork to prove or disprove what the system is. Sometimes it's really hard to get a drainage field in a property because sometimes they're really big. You don't just say, I'm going to have a 30-meter drainage field. It doesn't work like that. To design a drainage field, you need to carry out a test called a percolation test. This is a 2 consecutive day activity where trial holes are excavated in the part of the garden area that the drainage field wishes to be installed. Water is inserted. The time it drops a certain distance inside these test pits is measured. And if the test is a pass, it also gives a value of percolation. With this information against the number of bedrooms at the property, you throw it into a calculator and it tells you how many linear meters this drainage field needs to be. Now, if the water is draining slowly, you could get technically a formal pass result, but the drainage field needs to be, say, 150 linear meters. If it's a small garden, there might not be a big enough footprint to insert that drainage field, because it's not just looking at a garden saying, let's measure the dimensions. In the BS 6297, which is the specific drainage field British standard, it has a table of influencing characteristics where a drainage field can be installed, such as it's got to be you can't be within 2 meters of any boundary of a property. You've got to be 5 meters away from a property. You can't be near any other soakaways, whether it's an old soakaway for the foul system or a rainwater. You can't be under the crown of a tree because of the root structure that could negatively impact a drainage field. So you look at a big garden, you think, oh, irrespective of the percolation test results, we must have enough room. But if it's a big drainage field and then you introduce all these different parameters and characteristics, there might not be enough room. If you haven't got enough room for a drainage field, you can't have a septic tank. In default, you're then looking at a sewage treatment plant, which gives the different options for where it can legally discharge. So that percolation test is critical. And I notice that's a bit techie and I apologize, but it is important. Challenges posted. This is a building surveyor, an insurance claim surveyor, a drainage surveyor, one of my surveyors. It doesn't matter. Any surveyor going out. They don't know if the customer knows what they've got, so it's imperative we check. You can sometimes get an indicator above ground what the system might be, but again, you typically need to get it emptied to have a look. You need the camera equipment to ascertain if it's going to a ditch or a soakaway arrangement or some discharge to ground. You can only check the structural condition and check the capacity to make sure it's adequately sized. Once it's emptied, so you can get the measuring equipment in the tank. And again, not sales pitch, but it is imperative to get a full survey to create the evidence for all of our stakeholders in a property transaction to make sure that system is compliant and legal. It's not sales pitch. This is really go on our website if you want to. We've got about 80 blogs, loads of downloads. It's all completely free. And we've designed it about approximately a third of all our time is just chatting to other professionals in this sector, making sure that everyone has got the right information, and whether we're a safety net or we're just a sounding board, bounce ideas off us, please continue to do so. We're here as effectively a free resource to make sure the right job gets done every time. And this is the slide in case any of you lucky and lovely people wish to come out with any of the engineers. Please email info@ukdpsolutions.co.uk. Just give those details. You'll go onto a database, and the next time there's a survey in your area, we'll give you the heads up. And if you're available, fantastic. If not, we'll let you know when the next one is. I'm bored of my own voice, so Gemma, please come in and have a few questions for me.
Yeah, we've still got a few coming through. So the original question from Jenny was, is there a good way to check what the flow is that is coming from an existing septic tank stroke STP? So a bit more information on that. Just bear with me, I'll just scroll up. Yes, it was more about the quality of the water that would be coming from the existing septic tank or the sewage treatment plant.
Yeah,
Does that
excellent.
help?
Sorry, I should have guessed that. Thank you for the clarification. So yes, on a sewage treatment plant, absolutely. On the annual service visit, the attendant engineer will do a variety of tests, and one is a dip test specifically in the final effluent, so the last chamber, or if there's a sample chamber, which is always positioned after a treatment plant, they do a test of that and they check the pH levels, they check the quality, and that has to be recorded. So yes, that is always checked as a minimum once a year during the service. You don't have to do that as a requirement on a septic tank, but for example, when we go out and check, straight away, if the liquid level is at the wrong place, you can tell straight away the flow is going to be wrong because there is no flow, hence the tank being surcharged. If there is no crust on a septic tank, it means that the water is being pushed out before the separation process can occur. So again, you're looking exactly that it's flown too quick. That's normally an indicator that either the tank is massively undersized or there's rainwater connections causing some sort of hydraulic turbulence, and that's pushing the flow through too quickly. So much more formal on a flow and quality of effluent perspective on a sewage treatment plant, but on a septic tank, it's just more experience and visual checking during the visit.
Excellent. Thank you, James. David, you've got your hand up. You've been unmuted if you want to ask your question, please.
Yeah, I've got a residential property with a very large garden, but there are houses all round. Those houses have mains drainage. This property, I would have to cross other people's property to access. The garden is sufficient to take a drainage field, etc. Can you be forced to connect and pay someone for the easement to get to mains drainage?
I'll go back one stage. That's a brilliant question. So, say for example, a customer has a septic tank and a soakaway system, and it fails. If any part of a property is within 30 meters of a main sewer, the regulations stipulate that an approach to the main sewer or the WAS, Water and Sewage Company provider, that application has to be done first before any investigations into a replacement of mains drainage system are taking place. So it may be that the main sewer provider doesn't have any capacity, therefore that's fine. You revert back to getting a replacement of mains drainage system. But if you're within 30 meters and there is capacity, then that main sewer connection has to happen. The fly in the ointment might be that we're going through third-party land, in which case it does require the permission of the third-party owner, and there is no obligation on that third-party owner to say yes. In that hypothetical scenario, the process would then default to a replacement of mains drainage system. And also, if I can bore you a little bit more, that 30-meter rule is a multiplier. If you've got three properties sharing a septic tank, for example, it's 90 meters instead of 30. So if any part of any of those three properties are within 90 meters of a main sewer, again, if there's ever a problem with that system, the first option has to be a formal approach to the water company to get a main sewer connection.
Right.
Excellent.
Yeah, I've done a
Okay,
check out. Yeah, we're 15 meters away from the original house. This is for an annex, and the ground all falls away. I can get 15 meters from every boundary and create a small field in the middle. So I can be must be more than 30 meters from the mains drainage. It's just that the option is there. The land falls towards these houses, but it's third-party ownership.
Yeah, that does sound tricky. I mean, again, the scenario, if a replacement drainage field was a possibility, that percolation test in that specific scenario is so important, because even if it's a decent sized garden or not, the results of that percolation test will dictate everything. For example, if it's a fail or if it's a slow pass and you need too many linear meters, which can't physically be installed in that footprint of that garden, then we need an alternative system. So it's either a sewage treatment plant and a small footprint deep soak away, which will require a permit from the environmental regulator, or if that ground just won't support any soak away system, then we have got to get either a cesspit installed, which is obviously the worst option, or we're looking for a main sewer connection. But you're absolutely right. How can we get from A to B? Is it a direct route? If we can get to it, but it's a longer route, if we're not going through third-party land, it's probably going to involve the installation of a pump chamber, because there won't be enough gravity fall for it to flow under its own weight to the main sewer connection. So there will always be an answer. I've never come across a site that has completely baffled me. But the trickier it gets, the more landlocked it is, the deeper the system, the worse the ground, the more bespoke the solution will be. And unfortunately, in default, the more expensive that solution will be. But as I say, there will always be a solution, but the more bespoke, the more expensive. And I know that's horrible, but unfortunately, that's a fact of life in my sector.
Thank you. Thank you, James. Thank you, David, for your question. I know that we have overrun, so if anybody does need to leave now, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for your time. We'll be sending a recording out afterwards and a feedback survey, so please do leave if you do need to. James, have you got enough time to just run through the last couple of questions?
Yes, please.
Is that okay?
Go for it. Thank you.
It was mentioned that treatment occurs in a soakaway. What happens there?
Brilliant. And I only didn't talk about it because I knew I was short on time. So what happens is, in the sewage treatment plant, that middle section we talked about was the introduction of oxygen, because the food and water is already there. In a soakaway, the oxygen comes naturally through the ground, and this is why soakaways shouldn't be any deeper than 1 meter. So oxygen can break through the ground to a depth of 1 meter. When the clarified liquor, the dirty water, escapes out of a septic tank, it hits the soakaway, and the oxygen is already present. So in the material that the soakaway is made of, or hopefully in a drainage field where it's 20 mil clean stone around the bed, and then you've got the natural substrata, as that wastewater hits that the support material, the biomass, the good bugs, grow on that, because that's where the oxygen hits it. You've got the food and water from the septic tank waste, the oxygen coming through the ground, and your biomass grows on that supporting bedding material within or underneath the soakaway. And as it gets deeper under gravity, it will get cleaner and cleaner. It will hit an aquifer, hit a surface water, and away it goes. So that's why it's absolutely critical that that septic tank is working efficiently, because you can only have that dirty water hitting that soakaway. That's the only time you get that perfect storm of conditions for the treatment to occur. If you've got any damage to the soakaway, if you've got too much water going through, it will exhaust the soakaway. If you've got fat, oil, and grease going through, it will block those holes so nothing can escape into the substrata and get away. So that's why, although you've got a soaker and a septic tank, two separate component parts, they both rely on each other to work. That's why you've got to make sure both are working. It's why both have got to be checked. And otherwise, yes, we're going to have surcharge events and pollution spills and all sorts of other nasty issues.
Thank you, James. Okay, next question is, will there be any future change in legislation about the 1983 ruling, especially if pollution incidents occur?
I don't know is the answer to that. I really hope so. So there are various working groups where DEFRA and the E8 in England, for example, are involved. Nothing has been specifically mentioned about the 1983. All that's happening is, as there's more awareness about these regulations, in default, more of these pre-83 situations are being discovered, and therefore there is more discussions around them purely because there's a greater volume in the ether, so to speak. But no, at the moment, I'm not aware of anything to make it more specific or less ambiguous, shall we say.
Okay, fab. Bit of a long one. My role involves advising commercial kitchens on fog management, both GM equipment and procedures. I've come across a few businesses with off-mains drainage and was unsure of what advice was suitable. Would GM equipment be recommended with any of the off-main systems? Obviously, there's some separation in some of the systems similar to that of a passive GT. Would additional GM prior to waste entering the system be beneficial?
Yeah, so fantastic question. And apologies for not mentioning anything other than residential on this, only because I made hopefully the correct assumption that residential is a majority of our time. But on the commercial, 100%. For example, now if we were installing on a commercial site now where there was food production of any variety, there will be a stipulation by the manufacturer, whether it's their plant or not, that if they're installing a tank or sewage treatment plant, there has to be a grease trap installed upstream of it. Has to be, to the point that if there's not a grease trap to collect and deal with that fat, oil and grease, the fog aspect, their warranty is invalidated immediately. So from a commercial perspective, if there's no fog management on the upstream side between the property and the plant, whatever description it is, it's going to be helping that system to fail from day one. And I know that sounds a bit dramatic and a bit OTT in Hollywood, but this is why manufacturers are so hot on it now. There has to be a grease trap. If this is a 50-year-old system and it's an old brick tank going to the soakaway, and they weren't that aware of the need for fog management, the manufacturers will still stipulate now, even if that tank is working fine, put that fog system in, put that grease trap in, and different parameters contract typically with commercial, it won't be once a year, it'll be once a quarter. Get that fog, get that grease trap emptied, make sure there's baffles within it, make sure that's all working right, and make sure there's no structural defects, because the minute that goes wrong, that will start the failure process down the line. So yes, in any commercial setting, there should be a grease trap before whatever the off-mains drainage system is. And if there isn't one, the recommendation should be made immediately to have one installed.
Thank you very
Absolutely
much.
critical.
Excellent. Thank you, James. If clients don't have a drainage survey, is it acceptable for legal advisors to say that they cannot comment on the system and whether it does or does not comply with regulations? This must be from a conveyancer. You mention, oh, sorry, I've lost the question. You mentioned, oh, I've lost the question. Yeah, so basically, are they allowed to say that whether it does or does not comply with the regulation? You mentioned some PI claims, so I wondered what the position is re legal advisors' liability.
Oh, well, I haven't been involved in a PI. We've got 31, 32 on go now. None of them have come to full fruition. So I don't know any of the outcomes at all yet. Before I got hold or involved in any of these, I knew that some had been settled quickly by the PI insurers of the building surveyor, but I don't know the specifics around those early settlements. But I do know that they were full system payouts. They were between 20 and 30,000 pound each. All I know is in the rare occurrence where our survey can't stipulate one way or the other whether it's compliant or not. Originally, if we gave an explanation as to why that was sufficient, I'd say over the last 18 months, 24 months, that is no longer sufficient. We are getting the conveyancers pushing back saying that is not good enough. And I love that. We should be challenged. But sometimes, unless someone wants to pay for invasive investigations to allow more physical exploratory works to take place, no company is going to be able to say yes or no from an initial survey visit. So then there has to be a degree of logic applied to the transaction, get everyone's input, and then decide a way forward. But sometimes it is just not possible without an awful lot of very expensive invasive excavation works to be able to state yes or no whether a system's compliant.
Okay, thank you. A couple more questions. I've got a consent to discharge certificate from 2001. However, Enviro Agency says no longer correct and needs new permit or GBR compliant.
Okay. Well, the beauty of having a consent is that there will be a file with the environmental regulator. I'll be interested to know who's now saying that's not good enough. They have moved on over the last, well, that'll be what, 22 years ago. It may be that the consent obviously was legal 22 years ago, but the GBRs have superseded that and they want some sort of upgrade. Whether that's for an increased quality of effluent, I don't know this. I'd love to see the specifics of that because that's quite quirky. Historically, if a consent has been sanctioned and there's the audit trail to evidence that, that will still be fine up to the modern day. So I'd love to know the specifics behind that one, because that's very unusual. But normally, historic consent is still valid today. So that, yeah, there must be a very sort of niche reason on that one. Maybe there's been something on the discharge. If it's going to a watercourse, maybe it used to be free flowing and now it's seasonal, and that would change the parameters of that permission from the environmental regulator. Instead of it being a direct discharge, they would need a partial drainage field installed before it hits that watercourse. Or it may be that it didn't used to be a sensitive site, but now it is. But maybe it's been reclassified by the regulator. It's a triple SI, or it's now a GPZ zone, whatever it might be. But I'd need to know the specifics. I'm very happy to receive that and look at it if someone wants me to.
Okay, thank you, James. It's crucial that if the tank is not situated on your land and you are showing it, that the correct rights to use the system are in place. If the owner of the land which the tank is on decides to, say, be connected to mains drainage, there will be no recourse as no rights in place to use it.
Well, you guys are better positioned than me. So if there are no deeds, then if it's been in continual use for 20 years, then we've got prescriptive rights over that tank. The third-party landowner can't demand that system is stopped being used in that scenario of being over 20 years old. And they cannot remove the drainage provision for those upstream users, the assumed domestic property users. They would have to give fair notice that they wish to cut it off or redirect them. But I am not aware. I'm only aware of one. There was a farmer that got annoyed at inactivity on an ill-performing soakaway on their land, and they cut it off, and that went legal immediately because there was no provision of drainage for the upstream. So environmental health got involved, and that was messy. But normally the systems that are physically located off boundary, they've been there a long period of time, probably because the third party owners sold off plots of land historically and there's been boundary changes and it was just easier to keep the septic tank in place. So normally you've got that minimum 20-year usage, which gives the upstream users those rights anyway, irrespective of a written agreement. But yeah, once again, I'd have to look at the specifics of any case like that to see what the background was and if people wanted to move the system or go on mains. But I'm not aware of any scenario where the third party owner has made that happen forcibly or illegally.
Okay, thank you. I keep frequently being asked by buyer solicitors for an exemption certificate. Is this still relevant?
No, because unfortunately there isn't. People ask for a GBR certificate or an exemption certificate. An exemption was the old technical phrase for a permit to discharge consent, sorry. But really, there should have been, when this was devised in 2015 for the GBRs, there should have been a black and white ability to create a certificate, because everyone is asking for a GBR certificate or an exemption. There isn't one. You either have a permit to discharge from the environmental regulator, or you have a report evidencing and clearly demonstrating why this system is compliant with the general binding rules. But there is no certificate to say a property is GBR compliant or GBR exempt. There isn't one, I'm afraid.
Okay. Do the GP rules not apply to sewage treatment works?
Yes. So, although the binding rules were brought in predominantly for septic tanks illegally discharging to watercourses, it has also been used as a reminder of all the other overarching regulations, which, yes, sewage treatment plants come under. So the example I gave a moment ago, a sewage treatment plant is allowed to discharge to a watercourse, but if it's not a free-flowing watercourse and it dries up in the drier summer months, there has to be a seasonal drainage field installed before it hits the watercourse. And the GBRs remind everyone to look at the BS 6297, the Building Regulation 2010, and that's where it stipulates that. So it absolutely covers sewage treatment plants, how they're supposed to be maintained, how regularly, what the discharge quality is, where they're allowed to be discharging to, and that is all covered, albeit it's not necessarily so clear as a septic tank discharging to a watercourse within the general binding rules, but every system is covered under there. It may be that you need to use the GBRs as a catalyst to refer back to the other overarching regulations as well.
Fabulous. Thank you, James. Just last couple of questions now. We've got a thank you for a great presentation. We'll just slip that one in.
Thank
When
you.
buying a property, I often get told that the seller does not know or where the soakaway is.
Yep.
Are there requirements for the soakaway to be in a certain proximity to the septic tank?
No.
Okay.
No. And going back, that's a brilliant point. We've had so many scenarios, not just on the soakaway, where the sellers don't know what system they've got. In some scenarios, they don't know they're even on an off-main system. And they've been there 20 years. They've never had it emptied. They don't know of any manhole covers in the property. But when they're doing, you guys get involved and they say, well, hang on a minute, there's no connection to a main sewer here. What's going on? And then we're going around with a cast iron road pin hitting the ground, trying to find manhole covers. And then we're sort of telling the customer that what system they've got, and they've been there 20 years. So yeah, it's not just the location or proximity of the soakaway, it's what the system is, and do they even know what system they're on holistically? It can be a real eye-opener.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I'll discuss that with you later, actually, James. There might be a reason for that.
Okay.
It was the Environment Agency call handler themselves. That must be a response to a further question that we had earlier. I think it was about the permit one, asking for a permit. So it was the Environment Agency asking for a permit.
Oh, right. Okay.
Even more interesting now.
Yeah, because if it would have been the EA, because it was the river authorities, I think, from the 90s switched to the EA. So if it's a 2001 consent, it would have been an EA consent. So there has to be some specific change to the site dynamics that now requires a modern permit to discharge to be submitted and approved. But just, yeah, I'd love to know what that is, because they were really strict 20 years ago. So yeah, something must have changed there. But yeah, I'd love to know.
So maybe connect with you on LinkedIn. I'll send you an email after this if you need a bit more detail, and then we can assist further.
Yes, please. Yeah, that'd be great.
Lovely. And that's everything. That's everybody's questions. So thank you to the people that have managed to stay on. 20 minutes past the normal time. It's been a wonderful session. Thanks, James, for all of your knowledge. Clearly a very knowledgeable guy in this area. So thank you for your time, and thank you everybody else for staying on for the presentation. It's great that you could join us. And that is it from us today.
Awesome.
So thank yous and goodbyes.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Bye.